Okay, so sometime last week, I started seeing advertisements and promos on my Instagram feed for $1 million flawless basketball break that was set to take place in Vegas at the same time as the Mint Collective convention or conference or whatever you want to call it. And this was, of course, on the heels of some sort of high-profile flawless break that involved Drake. By the way, the first break involving Drake confused me quite a bit because as far as I can tell, he wasn't physically breaking any boxes, but he did show up in the comments for some of it. He was definitely present for the break this past Sunday night, though, and he seemed to really enjoy it. He was engaged. He asked questions about the cards that were shown. I can't fault the guy for that. So he seems like he's interested in the hobby. That'll be something that I guess is worth following here. But it appears that he's opening Flawless in search, primarily in search of this LeBron James triple Logo Man card, which has been hyped up a lot lately and is becoming the ultimate chase for this year's product. I can assume that Panini's loving it because it enables them to put out pretty much a ripoff of a product and then to hold that one unlikely hit over people's heads, and all the degenerate gamblers will still chase it. And the group breakers know that too, which is why two of the biggest ones, Blez Sports Cards and Layton Sports Cards, came together for what I want to talk about today, a break they dubbed the biggest break of all time. And if you wanted to be a part of this 25-case break, you could purchase one of 30 spots for the sum of $40,000 apiece. I know Blez put out a big hype video on his account to let us know that, quote, "This is going to happen once, and I promise you this is never going to happen again." And then also to tell us that Ken Golden would be sponsoring the event. And in the days that followed, we got some of the typical theater that you would expect from a group of hobby thespians. One of the Blez brothers posted a video of him getting a manicure ahead of time because he was going to pull so much fire. I think another one posted a reel of him doing some sort of like warm-ups or calisthenics. So, it was all a lot of theater. And just for reference, Blez is comprised of multiple brothers. So there are going to be times in the recap where I probably just collectively refer to all of them. And then some cases where, maybe just any one of them as Blez. They kind of all operate as one. This is going to make things flow a lot smoother, in my opinion, because otherwise it gets kind of hairy. Now, as many of you know, I have not been the biggest advocate of group breaking in the past. It doesn't mean that I'm anti-breaking necessarily. I've said that before. I'm not anti-breaking, but I don't always like what it's become. I've talked about it several times on the show before, but for context's sake, I'm going to summarize that stance for you real quick again. It's very similar to what I posted on social media before this break even began. I said, remember this. Group breaks were essentially created so people could afford the few high-end products. Now these same breaks are pricing people out in ways they shouldn't. The solution is helping to perpetuate the original problem. Notice, I did not say all group breaks are evil. I didn't say breakers were the only contributing factor to rising prices, but I think we can look at the original intent, and a lot of us might agree that it's evolved into something that could be a little bit concerning. And most of the responses that I got to that social media post were positive. There were a couple, though, that I want to address here real quick before I begin talking about this big break. One person wrote, "The growth of the hobby is the reason you have the platform that you do. You can't have it both ways. With growth comes change." Now, I think this is obvious to the people that listen to this show, but I'll repeat it in very clear language for you. I don't sit here and try to pander to people for a platform. If you listen to this show, I think you would know that by now. And if I did, I can guarantee you, with all the people that have approached or all the opportunities that have been out there, this could look like a very different show right now. But I'm very conscious of what I'm trying to do. And I think that's all that needs to be said there. And then the second response that I want to talk about is where someone tried to explain capitalism to me. Well, thank you, right? Look, I do not sit on Instagram and have long back and forths with people in the comments, but I plan to make it very clear by the end of this episode that this was not just a simple matter of economics 101, because capitalism becomes, at least, and at the very least, a little more nuanced when breakers, marketplaces, and distributors collaborate together to all of a sudden become sponsors, promoters, and participants in a singular event that can have a major impact on the market itself. So that is a little bit beyond Economics 101. All right, with that being said, I think it's time for me to jump right in. My plan today is to try and recap what I saw, and there was a lot, with some general commentary along the way, and then I want to end with some final thoughts, because as I mentioned in today's intro, I think there are a lot of lessons that the hobby should learn from this. Okay, so Thursday night, I saw all the stuff leading up to this break, or I saw a lot of the advertisements, and the time finally came. I pulled the stream up on my computer, and front and center there are two models standing in front of all 25 cases. And you guys have seen that coverage already. This garnered a lot of attention throughout the course of the evening in more ways than one, and I'll touch more on that later. We're then greeted by one of the Blez brothers, who goes by the name Backer, and the other man responsible for this thing, Rich Layton. And they talk about how far they've come personally. Backer mentioned that he was a high school dropout. He mentions that Rich was delivering pizzas. This is all part of the theater. Blez then talks about the main chase in this break, which I've alluded to, or I've described really already, which is that LeBron triple logo man. And he claims that from his sources, quote, "There's almost none of this stuff left." And then they both claim that they're going to donate $25K to charity if they hit this card, and it's going to, quote, "break the internet forever." And then he also states, "Being a part of this is a story that you'll never forget for the rest of your life." This whole dialogue so far is kind of strange because, well, I guess maybe a monologue even. They are kind of talking to one another though, but it's kind of strange because they're essentially trying to sell you on the idea of the break again when all of the spots are already sold out. So I don't know if they were worried about the way this thing would be perceived, or maybe they were trying to soothe the consciences of the people that had already bought in, or maybe both, but there was some salesmanship going on nonetheless. So that whole segment that they did there took a long time, which you'll hear me say that about a lot of things, but eventually one of the girls brings the first case over to the camera, and it's got a computer printout with a logo on the side, as all 25 cases will. It's a sponsor. Okay, the very first case is sponsored by a distribution company. Imagine that. Of course, they're all about an event like this where they can convince people to spend large amounts of money on a product that probably won't deliver on the scale that everyone's hoping for. But the people that are breaking this case wouldn't want you to know that it didn't deliver, because right off the bat, Blez peeks inside the case and yells, "Huge hit!" And then there's this awkward, uncomfortable pause. We got a little bit of a delayed, unenthusiastic applause from the two models. It was kind of like watching an improv with actors that had never really worked with one another before. I guess they were kind of feeling one another out, but eventually that hit was revealed, and it was a $650 Kevin Durant auto. Which segues us into case 2, which was sponsored by Blowout Cards. And they sell boxes. And they bring in a bald guy with a Blowout hoodie and with a, kind of a long goatee, who's the owner of Blowout. But they didn't say that for a while, though, and someone in the chat immediately called him Hugo Strange, which was a 10 out of 10 Batman reference, in my opinion. I know I laughed about that one for a couple minutes, but as this case is being opened, I noticed that there were a lot of instances where the cards moved off camera, which was strange considering there were 3 cameras. And Blez actually commented on that later in the night, noting that he said he was probably the worst technical breaker in the room. And he talked about how they organized this in such a short amount of time and it wasn't their normal setup. That was a little concerning. Regardless, though, I don't think there was any sleight of hand going on here. There really wasn't any need for it. They'd already got the money. They'd already got, everything that they were wanting. They did very well on this whole experience. But nonetheless, you need to keep the cards on the camera. That's like rule number 1 of group breaking. So one of the cards that did make it onto the camera was the first of many Louis Dampier autos, and they read the team as the Kentucky Colonels. I know not everyone's a big ABA fan, but most literate people would still call them the Colonels. And then, of course, they were stumped about what team this card would go to, which they did figure it out by the end of the night, but that was a little bit of an ordeal there at the start. Now, I can't say that I had ever sat through an entire Blez break before this, so what a break to start out with. But At this point, someone in the chat was complimenting him for how professional he was being. And I'd seen social media pictures and reels of him breaking shirtless, so I guess this was a big step up. But the night was still young. So here we are, we're about 45 minutes in, and we had only seen 2 of the 25 cases. I didn't think I was going to have the stamina for this thing. Luckily, there was a Pacers game that was starting in the next few minutes after case 2. Just in time for case number 3, which was sponsored by another distributor. I mean, what are the odds of that? One of the Layton guys jumped in for this break. They kind of all alternated throughout the course of the evening. There were some Blez people, some Layton people. I guess his moniker was Breaking Brad. And he peeks and he sees a huge card. So, of course, everyone came over to the camera and stood and danced around. And it made you think it was this triple logo man or something. In the meantime, though, before he reveals that one, he reveals the rest of the cards, one of which is another Louis Dampier autograph, in which he got the team name right, but he called him Louis Dampier. So that's strike number 2 on Louis cards. The logo man is then revealed, however, and it's Michael Porter Jr. The girls are off camera now. Presumably they found a chair. And as they're showing this logo man, Breaking Brad is trying to make air horn noises with his mouth. So, yes, that was case number 3. And don't worry, I'm not going to cover the remaining 22 with that much detail. But case 4 rolls around. The girls are back. And our sponsor is, let me make sure I've got the right notes here. Yes, another distributor. And this is where things started to go full-on Blez. Another Blez brother steps in to break. There's instant screaming. There's a hype man in the background. And we get another speech. And there were a lot of speeches on this night. In fact, one of the bullet points I wrote down at this point said, there is absolutely no sense of urgency here. There was a lot of fumbling around with cards, with names, with everything. And up to this point, all of the comedy had been unintentional. Then they pulled a Mo Cheeks auto, though, and one of the brothers screamed, Maurice Butt Cheeks. I have to confess, I did get a good laugh out of that. But then it was time for more flatulent oratory, when Blez proudly proclaimed, we knew we could go to the moon, Blez family. We did. We didn't think we could go any further, and we have. I don't even know what that means. Anyway, Breaking Brad steps back in. And the girl on the right, the model on the right, sneaks a look at her watch. But I saw it. And reality's starting to set in for her. And it's grim. And then there was case 5, sponsored by another distributor. How many of these companies are out there? Before the seal is even broken, we get more speeches. Blez makes a comment on how this is going to be a long night, and they just kind of laugh it off. And someone in the chat remarked, the best break in sports card history turned into the worst Blez infomercial of all time. And while the chat was kind of fun, the Layton channel eventually turned comments off for everyone except for Layton members, meaning you had to pay to comment. I didn't know people actually paid for that, but I guess they do. And at the same time, Blez is pitching his own community, the greater Blez family, is what they kept saying, the Blez family. They were pushing this whole family narrative like their Olive Garden. When you're here, you're family. Okay, chill out. You don't know me like that. I just want some breadsticks. I don't really buy the whole family thing. I think that's very intentional the way they're marketing that. But in their defense, there are a lot of dysfunctional families out there. Okay, now it's time for some first off the line cases, and Rich Layton steps in. And someone asks if it's Bert Kreischer, who ironically enough is a comedian that rose to popularity with a bit that he performed shirtless, the machine. We didn't get that bit this time, though. We got Layton's version of an infomercial where he doesn't want to outright say that his brand is way different than the Blez brand, but he's trying to imply it in a nice way, like he's trying to give us the secret signal so Blez can't see it. I'm not going to let Richie Rich off the hook for this so easy. I'm going to come back to that later because there's a lot more to say there. Anyway, after case number 6, I needed an intermission so I could watch the Pacers lose by 30 to the Grizzlies. Yes, that was more enjoyable. It was a glorious sight. This also allowed me to watch a good portion of the break later at 2 times the speed, and that was a game changer. Otherwise, I would not have made it, I can assure you that. When I resumed play, I was immediately hit with another Louis Dampier auto pull, and once again, he was playing for the Colonels. Now, we've heard about the Blez family plenty by now. Did this family not play Clue when they were growing up? Or was it always Colonel Mustard in the conservatory? Louis, I'm sorry that you're being disrespected like that. Soon after, Blez tries to bring another one of his employees out as he talks more about family, prompting that person to state, quote, "No one cares who I am." It's just more unintentional comedy. And they mentioned the fact that they were only 40% done with the break so far. I double-checked the YouTube settings at this point to see if there was a 3x speed. Sadly, that feature has not been added yet. Around case 13 or 14, so notice I'm skipping a little bit here, I saw a tweet from a well-known trout collector named Sue Tiska, who was upset about the models being part of the break. And I'll be honest, my first impression that, I kind of likened it to UFC having ring girls. I thought it was tacky. I rolled my eyes when I saw it, but I didn't consider how it might make female collectors feel too. She was not alone in this. I saw another well-known female collector, a Golden employee actually, tweet out, "Being a woman in this hobby was not enjoyable tonight." And there was enough discussion developing around the issue that Leighton felt the need to address it mid-break on their Instagram. I'm going to read that post for you now. Leighton Sports Cards respects that there are many different kinds of breakers. We have a long-standing tradition of being family-friendly, and we remain true to those principles. That said, please recognize that tonight's break in collaboration with another breaker is not a typical break for us. There were many people and sponsors involved. Oftentimes, models are hired in the hobby for different purposes. However, it's not a practice of Leighton Sports Cards to use models in a way that objectifies them. This can be seen on our 10 years worth of videos. We pride ourselves in being leaders in the industry when it comes to inclusivity. We regret that tonight's event in Las Vegas does not represent the principles that we strive to uphold. End quote. We saw some of the same sentiment from Richie Rich earlier. And remember, this is mid-break. He's essentially trying to say, hey, we regret it and our name's on the headliner of the event, but we're not really going to step in and do anything about it. You just have to imagine this is like all our other breaks, even though we marketed it as a break like no other. I'll come back to this. So even at 2 times the speed, I eventually caught up to the live stream, so I paused it again and went to bed. I was not going to watch the rest of this at a normal speed. It just was not going to happen. So when I resumed the next day, it started off, there were a lot of thank yous to Ken Golden. Of course, having 25 cases of a high-end product ripped benefits him. I would guess that the majority of the big hits end up on his platform. And at this point, I was just very casually watching this while working on something else when all of a sudden I see one of the Blez brothers removing his shirt. We went 6 hours and 40 minutes before this happened. That is just unbelievable restraint. And then, of course, he added, "I gotta be honest, my nipples look really bad on camera." And guess who's sitting right by him at this point? Richie Rich Leighton. He's stuck in the same frame as this guy, and he's just nodding his head. It's the kind of nod you might do when you're already having a horrible day, and then that jar of spaghetti sauce falls out of your grocery bag and smashes on the floor. The disappointment was palpable. And someone off-screen, while all this is happening, suggested that Rich should take his shirt off as well, but he declined. Can't do that. So they start opening the box in front of them, and Leighton has to remind Blez to keep the cards on camera, and that's where Blez mentions that he's a horrible technical breaker, to which Leighton chimes in, "Yeah, but you're fun to watch." And eventually the break itself ends, and the LeBron Triple Logo Man is nowhere to be found. So Dave and Adams threw in a couple loaded boxes of 1-in-1, so they broke those real quick before we got more speeches, and pretty revealing ones too. The first one was all about how quick they organized this thing. which it's funny how they kept coming back to this idea throughout the night. When something went wrong, it was a scapegoat. When something went right, it was a trophy. Then Rich claims that they all had a great time, and Blez talks more about the origins of the event. He said, "Why don't we do something for the industry? Why don't we do something that will change the industry forever?" Then there was a little hug and a handshake. The shirts are back on now. And Blez boasts, "We care about one thing, making smiles on people's faces. I couldn't be happier to be part of this with Rich Layton." To which Rich Layton chimes in, "Same here, man." Doesn't seem like there's any regret to me. And then Rich continued, "A lot of drama unfolded tonight in the chat and on social media that I think was misunderstood. However, I'd like for you guys to kind of see where we're both coming from." Then he basically described that the two of them have different styles, but that they can coexist. Blez more or less closes by saying that we were all blessed to be able to watch this and that it should have been pay-per-view. Okay, so after 7 hours of being blessed, or blessed, I should say, I have some takeaways that I'd like to share with you today, and I could really take this in a number of directions. I already touched a bit on the fact that people were upset about the models, and that has since created some constructive dialogue about inclusion in the hobby. One of my collector friends and I were messaging about this, and he wrote, 30 plus years as a brown skin guy in the hobby, I can tell you that it's gotten better from when I would be the easiest person to spot on the showroom floor, but it's nowhere close to where it should be. So clearly we've got a long way to go there. So that's one thing. Another thing that stood out to me was that a lot of the names involved in this were distributors, or hobby retailers, or marketplace owners. And I can't help but think that they probably realize that if they promote this narrative of people spending tons of money on this stuff, in turn, they can keep distributing it, they can keep selling it, and they can keep listing the few high-end hits that come from it. And hey, that might not be as big of a deal if they were promoting a break that actually offered fair value or a reasonable return for the participants. In that scenario, everyone would win. However, that wasn't the case here. A Blowout Forums user named Hermano Tarjeta comped some of the cards and crunched some numbers before posting the following. He said, "I estimated no more than 160,000 back, 155,000 without the last two freebie boxes of 1-in-1. 16% return on $1 million retail paid. When are breaker participants ever going to learn? That's an average of about $6,000 back per $40,000 case. People simply have too much money to blow." And someone responded to that by saying, "I don't care about what other people do with their money. Not my business." To which Hermano Tarjeta replied, "I care how other people should blow their money because it prevents me from blowing my money on Flawless. Maybe I should thank them." And while he closed that response with a little bit of humor, don't let that distract you from the overall point he's trying to make. There were probably some people involved in this that just really loved gambling and could stomach taking a huge hit like that. But that enables Panini to keep putting out a watered-down product. At some point, these gamblers could decide they've had enough, they'll up and leave, and things will be in a worse spot for the people that are still left. And as many people have told me, even though they're putting out a bad product, this is not on Panini. Everyone's quick to tell me, hey, this isn't Panini's fault. They do not entirely create the market. I agree. And if you don't believe me, check out this audio from an August of 2021 video from Blez's Instagram account.
Folks, about a few minutes ago I just signed off, and I just have to make an announcement. I've been in this industry since I was 4 years old. It's always been a dream of mine to collect sports cards, and the last few days we put a bunch of National Treasures basketball breaks in store. Pick your teams, random teams, one box random teams, even FOTL, National Treasures. And for those of you that were watching the live, I opened up 3 cases and I decided to pull the plug. It's very simple. I don't support the market. I don't support the price of National Treasures. I don't support the market on it. And we pride ourselves on offering, in my opinion, the best value products in the industry. And I believe that National Treasures I cannot physically be on Blez offering this product. I don't feel good about it. So I've decided we are not going to offer it anymore.
Unfortunately, the conclusion of that video was spent shilling another Panini product that he would have in hand shortly after. I guess back then I got tricked. It gave me a small glimmer of hope that we could start moving away from some of the more extreme examples of gambling with group breaking. So I guess my question is, how can you go from, I cannot physically be on Blez offering this product, I don't feel good about it, to manufacturing the biggest break of all time for a product that we already knew was absolutely brutal, because we just saw it right before that with all the Drake stuff, at least in the first round that preceded this $1 million break, which, by the way, Blez was also a part of. I guess when things reach a certain dollar threshold, everything changes. And you can't tell me that the LeBron Triple Logo Man changes things. These high-end products have been feast or famine for a long time. And I'll play more of that August of 2021 audio clip for you, where you can hear Blez essentially concede that even the prospect of a big hit is not worth the gamble for his customers, aka the people they call family.
I don't like seeing people get hurt, okay? I've been in this industry, I've been on the other side of it my whole life, and, yes, you're not always going to get something great, but at least you want a really good chance of getting something. And in this product, I believe it doesn't meet my standards of a product that we should be breaking, okay?
I've had people in the last week try to tell me that, everyone should just expect this kind of stuff from this company, and that's who they are. And that might be a little bit harsh. I'm not here to try and label them. But they need to know that this kind of stuff goes a long way when it comes to branding. And if that's how they want to be branded, fine. If not, they probably need to make some changes. It looks kind of gross for the hobby either way. And that brings me to the Layton Group, a group that, from everything I've seen, has had a good reputation in this hobby. And they seem pretty proud of that too, at least in their written communication on social media. You could see that they felt like there was a chance that their reputation could have been compromised a little bit. I got that vibe throughout the entire course of the break, because there were a number of conflicting messages. Allow me to run through them again. We got the combined speech at the start where both groups were all buddy-buddy. Around case 6, Layton steps in and tries to, in a nice way, imply that the two breaking groups have two very different styles. In the live chat on the side, the official Layton Sports Cards account writes, "It needs to be known that the models or sponsorships were not our idea." Well, why does it need to be known? And then as talk continues to build on social media, their official social media account releases that big statement that includes the claims that we have a long-standing tradition of being family-friendly and we remain true to those principles. We pride ourselves in being leaders in the industry when it comes to inclusivity. And then we saw the disappointed nods from Layton when Blez takes his shirt off, which is a staple of their brand that they have partnered with here. And then Rich gives a speech toward the end where he claims that they all had a great time. We get the handshake and the hug. Blez says, "I couldn't be happier to be part of this with Rich Layton." Rich chimes in, "Same here, man." And then Rich steps in and offers a sort of disclaimer that more or less emphasizes once again that the two group styles are very different. So, when this whole thing was over, a lot of people kept going back to the social media posts that said, "We regret that tonight's event in Las Vegas does not represent the principles that we strive to uphold." I saw someone comment on this post that Rich should have been the adult in the room and tried to stop whatever it was that bothered him. After all, his name's on the event. He had the power to do so. Instead, he spent the whole night oscillating between the head of the table and the kids' table. And it wasn't a good look. And I think, once again, dollar signs had something to do with it. I don't think it was about putting smiles on faces, except maybe theirs. If I had to sum up this evening, which I feel like it could be a monumental task, but I would read another blowout post because I think there's someone on there that did it better than I could. And this person's name is Dave. Their username on there, though, is Cal's Drago. And he wrote, "It's not good. Not for breakers, not for hobbyists, not for wax dealers, not for Panini, not for fanatics. It might be a good wake-up for degenerate gamblers to move on to something else. At a small scale, think a case of Prism, it's easy to look past the bad returns on wax. At large scale like this, you can't look past it. This break was a disaster. How does anyone open flawless at this point? 25 cases and not a single one broke even. This should spill into other breaks as well. Maybe the disconnect between wax prices and singles can finally start to correct. Well, as I was putting my final touches on this segment, I saw a social media post about a panel at the Mint Collective called The Future of the Breaking Business, which also took place in Vegas. And it got me thinking, unless people stop supporting this kind of behavior, there's a part of me that fears we've already had a more ominous version of that panel. And it took place over the course of 7 long hours late Thursday night. All right, well, there you have it. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen today. I don't expect you to agree with every point I made there, but I did put a lot of time into this. At the very least, consider the points that were made, and then maybe we'll have some more dialogue about this in the future. Maybe there were some good things to take from this that I just wasn't able to see. Let me know. As always, you can find me on Instagram under the handle @WaxMuseumPodcast or on Twitter under @WaxMuseumPC.